Hi guys, so today we are starting my high-end eyeshadow palette declutter series. I have no idea how many videos I'm going to end up breaking this into. I'm going to record this all in one swoop and then kind of edit it together and kind of figure out where logical breaks in the whole declutter series. So what that means is I'm not going to be doing totals at the end of every single video like I typically have done for my past declutters. I'm going to wait until I've uploaded all of these eyeshadow palette declutter videos, and then we will come back and give a total at the very end as far as how many I've kept versus how many I've actually decluttered. I do want to call out two things before we get started. One, I am an eyeshadow palette junkie. I love eyeshadow palettes. They are always the launching point for how I think about doing my makeup in the morning. I think about what eye look do I want to do, and then everything else is kind of a springboard from that. I tend to find the most creativity and honestly just joy and love of makeup from playing around with eyeshadow palettes. So I say that because a lot of these I think I'm going to keep. I do think there's some ones in my collection I'm ready to part ways with, but I did want to call that out in the front end of this just so you guys are aware. I've been fairly brutal in some of my other declutters, and I don't think I'm going to be as extreme here. We shall see. And then the second thing I wanted to call out is that I kind of decided to do this by brand. So I thought about trying to do my cool tone versus warm tone versus neutral versus colorful palettes and divide them all out that way. But at the end of the day, I don't know. To me, it just made more sense to think about these by brand. It's how I have them organized in my drawers. So that is how we're going to approach them. And then just a reminder, these are my high-end palettes. I recently did a drugstore declutter video. If you want to see my drugstore eyeshadow palettes, I will link those down below. I did those probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago. So I looked through my collection and I'm not necessarily feeling like I'm wanting to do another drugstore eyeshadow declutter video right now. Maybe we'll do another one as kind of a one-off declutter at the end of the year. We shall see. But for right now, I'm pretty happy with how my drugstore palettes look. It's just my high-end palettes that are getting a little disorganized. So that's a long rambly intro. Let's go ahead and get into some palettes. Up first are all of my Urban Decay eyeshadow palettes. They're mostly fitting here on the screen. They're trickling off to the side a smidge, but let's start with the basics ones here and then we'll scooch these over so you can see them more clearly. Let's start with the first palette here. This is the Naked One palette. As you can see, this is well loved. I have used this palette for years. In fact, I recently realized how old it was. There's been a series of videos going around on YouTube talking about your first Sephora orders. This was definitely one of the first things I ever purchased at Sephora way back in the day, like a lot of people. About the time that I realized how old this palette is, I mean, we're talking like, what is it, 2008? Gosh, this palette may be almost 10 years old at this point. That's scary. When I realized that this was A, getting discontinued, and B, was such an old palette, I did go ahead and purchase a new one at 50% off because I have very sentimental attachment to this. I know not a lot of people loved this palette. They felt like there wasn't enough mattes, there wasn't enough diverse shades in here, but for me, I wore this on my wedding day, so I have very fond memories of this palette, and I absolutely love the 2 matte shades that are in here. Half Baked and Buck are just beautiful shades, just really soft and pretty. Try and do this so you guys can see some swatches. I'm not going to swatch every shade, and every palette will be here for 1,000 years, but I do want to swatch any like shadows that really call out to me. Half Baked is absolutely stunning, one of my favorite gold shades on the lid. And then I really liked these sort of warmer rosy shades down here. I thought these two actually made a really pretty kind of combination look. I can definitely tell that this one's probably going off. It's just feeling a little chunky and weird feeling. Not shocked considering how old this thing actually is. So I am going to go ahead and throw this one away, but I'm not going to count it as a declutter because I have a full backup sitting in my closet. Urban Decay Naked 2. This palette was probably my favorite out of all of them. I really liked the combination of colors in here. I liked the cool tones of this palette. I love the fact that it still had some warmer shades in here as well. So you had a replicated shade and Half Baked, but I loved the shade Chopper. I thought this tea shade was an absolutely beautiful sort of matte shade. Worked with a lot of the tones in this palette. Like I said, that's Chopper. And then I loved using these two, even though they're both sort of satiny, shimmery shades. These two I thought made a beautiful look together, side by side. And then these two here, Verve and Pistol, continue to this day to be one of my favorite cool toned looks. You've got sort of a cool toned taupey silvery shade, and then more of a gunmetal. So I loved the shades in here, and then this YDK shade was also incredible. This is actually my second palette. I had panned so many of these back in the day that I went ahead and purchased a new one, so I do love this one. Definitely not getting rid of it. Naked 3 was the one that made me realize that I liked and could wear sort of rosy pinky tones. This was not a shade combination that I had tried a ton. I know a lot of people were really interested in this shade, or this palette rather, for the shade Trick, which I really have to use with a wet brush. It's kind of got some hard pan now because it is so, I've wet it so many times, but it's an absolutely stunning, stunning shade. I love Buzz. It's a beautiful pinky mauve. I know a lot of people complained that they only got one look out of this palette. I don't know. I always enjoyed this palette. I thought you had some really pretty matte shades that worked well in a crease to deepen it up a little bit. And then, like I said, I don't mind using deeper sort of satin shades to actually achieve a finished look. I don't feel like I have to use a pure matte shade in my outer corner every single time. So I did really like this palette. I am gonna hang on to it. Let's talk about these two Vice palettes. These are pretty old in my collection. I believe this is Vice 2. I can't remember. They used to put these out at holiday. Fairly certain this is Vice 2. And then actually, let's do this. Let's push these out of the way and let's just look at these two Vice palettes specifically, because I wanna see if I wanna keep them. And then this, I think, was the last one they released. As I look at these two palettes, the one that I still feel like catches my eye the most is this one here, this Vice 3. You've got this entire row of matte shades here. You've got a couple other mattes kind of tossed in. You've got kind of cool tone looks. You've got a pinky row look. You've got this purpley beige row. I felt like every row was kind of a color story that I could wear on my eyes. This one was a little bit more random to me. That's fine. And I just don't know as if I loved it quite as much. Let me give you a couple of swatches of my favorite shades in both of these palettes. One, I loved this shade Sonic, and I love this shade Lucky. These were shades that I hadn't really found in a lot of palettes at that point. Now these shades are fairly common, but at the time you just didn't see them a lot of different places. And then I love the shade Freeze, which is an absolutely stunning, beautiful teal shade. And then I really loved these two mattes in particular. These are really creamy feeling, and I love having some cooler toned mattes as well as some more neutral mattes in here. And then this shade Angel, although it's really taupey and almost grayish, is just beautiful all over the lid too. This palette, I think I was drawn to these two shades right out of the gate. So the shade Flare and the shade Grasshopper were really pretty. I feel like I have other shades in my collection now that are very similar to those. This shade C Note was also really pretty to me. Yeah, there's some pretty shades in here, but I don't know as if I'm super drawn to the shades in here. So I do think I'm gonna go ahead and pass this guy along. I do think I wanna keep this one for the time being. I just think I need to pull this out and love on it a bit more. That green shade could be super fun for fall. Yeah, that's a really fun shade. And you've got a bright green in here too, kind of like you had with the other one. Yeah, I want to keep this one. Okay, two more Urban Decay palettes left. This is the Urban Decay Ultimate Naked Basics. I never really loved this one. I put this in sort of a disappointing products video a while back. This was the one that I looked at in the store and I thought, you know what, I don't really like this. I don't think I'm really gonna get on with it that well. And I felt like, in part, because I didn't really love the color story they had here, I felt like these two shades here were super similar, and then these two shades here were super similar. And I just didn't see a ton of full looks in here. And then I started watching people do tons of reviews and really loving it. And so I broke down, in fact, I don't even know if this was on sale at the time, but I broke down and I purchased this thing, and I had the reaction that I had expected to have rather when I got it. The mattes are okay, they're not bad. Sorry, my wrist is stained from that last palette. They're not bad mattes, I don't know. I never really have enjoyed using this palette, and I think it's just time to let it go. And then this is the Urban Decay Gwen Stefani palette. I don't intend to let this go. I will admit I need to probably pull this into rotation because I haven't used it in a little while, but I just thought that it was such a fun neutral palette. You've got a couple fun pops of color in here, but in general, I just thought the mattes were really pretty, and I liked the softness of this palette and how natural it was. but I also felt like it had some really pretty sort of light washes on the lid. I mean, it did remind me very much of Gwen Stefani's looks, so packaging was probably the best that I think I've ever seen Urban Decay do, so I'm gonna hang on to this. All right, up next, let's look at all of my Tarte palettes. So I've got a couple different collections here. Let's go through these one by one. This is the original Tartelette palette, and then this is Tartelette in Bloom. Tartelette in Bloom is one that I love. I reach for and travel with this a absolute ton. The original Tartelette palette is an all matte palette. I haven't found myself reaching for this one a ton, to be totally honest. Let's do a couple swatches here so you can see the tones in each of these palettes. We'll push this to the side. This one, I absolutely love the sort of warmer shades down here, your more neutral shades here, and then cooler tone shades here at the top. I think you've got a really nice mix of undertones in here. This Sweetheart and Rebel combo is probably one of my favorite sort of go-to work looks. I absolutely love this color combo. And then this Funny Girl shade all over the lid, absolutely stunning. I love that you've got a more neutral shade here and then a more cool toned sort of matte crease shade. So those work really well. And then the other two shimmer shades are a taupe and sort of a warmer coppery shade. Blend really easily, they last all day on my eyes. I just really love this palette, so definitely keeping this. As it relates to this matte palette, I mean, you've got neutrals, you've got cool tone sort of plummy colors here, and then you've got kind of a combination of cool and warm shades down here on the bottom. I have no issues with the quality of this palette in any way, shape, or form. Like, I think they all perform incredibly well on my eyes. I just feel like I'm reaching for other matte palettes in my collection. I'm gonna pass this on. I don't have enough attachment to it to want to keep it, and I feel like I've got other matte, all matte palettes coming up that I prefer to this. This is the Tarte Make Believe in Yourself palette. This is such a nice palette for people who are wanting to play with color but want to do it in a subtle way. You've got some more common shades, sort of brown and a copper here. You've got this very greenish gold that is absolutely stunning all over the lid. I love that you've got two bluish shades down here that are sort of, they're nice blues. Like, this is a way to play with blue that if you're intimidated by color, probably won't freak you out entirely. I like this purple and this more taupey shade down here. I absolutely love those shades as well. You've got a really interesting sort of duochrome lavendery gold color. I'm gonna put it on my hand to see if I can get the shift to show up on camera. But you can see that it goes sort of lavender and gold as it shifts. It's a really unique color in my collection, so I love this palette. This is a highlighter shade that you could technically wear on your face. I've never really cared for it. It does make a decent inner quarter brighten shade, but for the most part I've kind of ignored it. You have one matte shade in here. And I will say, you know, people have been frustrated with this palette, or maybe were a little bit when it launched because it just had the one matte shade. But what I found is that if you take one of these colors all over your lid, sort of start to buff it out, and then use this as a sort of transition from where it goes from your crease up maybe above your lid, this is actually probably the perfect matte shade to have included in this palette to go with all of these shimmer shades. So definitely keeping this. This is the Tarte Pro To Go. I love this palette. I have taken this traveling so many times. I can make a really work appropriate look with just these mattes here, and then you've got three shimmer shades. What's really great is that these mattes really are phenomenal in your crease, corner, and as a deepener, and then pop any of these sort of pearly, they're metallic, they're not pearly, these metallic shades on your lid, and you've got a really well thought out, balanced eye look here. So although you've just got six shades in total, my arm's a little wet, sorry, those swatches are looking a little jagged there, but although you've only got 6 shades in here, I feel like I can create a myriad of looks. So I have really loved how tiny and compact this is for travel. This is the Tartist Pro palette. So this is supposed to be like the original big palette that the mini was used as inspiration off of. I would argue that the 4 sort of metallic shades here on the side are not quite as good of a quality as what's in this little mini palette. I'm not sure why that is, but I found these a little more difficult to use. The mattes are pretty. I don't know, guys, I've never bonded with this palette. I've tried it, I've traveled with it. I think you can make some beautiful looks with the colors in here. Something about the colors and the combinations I end up with on here, I've just never loved this palette. It's a big palette too, so it takes up a decent amount of space in my drawer. I don't know, I'm gonna pass on this. I feel like there's somebody else in my life who will enjoy this more. Last Tarte palette, this is the Clay Play palette. This is the original one. It came with a bronzer and a really deep bronzer and a contour shade, and then a bunch of different matte eyeshadows. I think that they have made really nice little quads here as well. These can all be used on your eyes. It has a giant freaking mirror here at the top. I feel like they didn't give this one enough time to catch on. I think the quality of these is really beautiful. I think the contour shade is great for me, and then that is actually a bronzer that I can use as well. These are swatched very heavily. They make beautiful eyeshadows as well. I just feel like they jumped the gun on discontinuing this too quickly, and as a result they had extra packaging that was left over, and so they made this really stupid decision to take this packaging, put a new sticker over the back here, put a blush, and change out a couple of colors, but the names were all the same. So literally it was the exact same packaging, exact same names, and then like they substituted like 1 or 2 colors out from here and rearranged a smidge and tried to play it off as the Clay Play 2. It was a little shady, to be totally honest. The original Clay Play though, the quality is gorgeous. It's definitely a matte palette I like having in my collection. This makes such beautiful work appropriate looks if you want something all matte. And then I love this as a pairing palette. Like this is one where I've taken this because it's given me my bronzer and my contour. It's given me all of the neutral matte shades I would want, and then I can just throw in a couple of fun singles for my eyeshadow singles drawer, and I've got some beautiful looks. So I'm keeping this. All right, so up next we have a giant pile of Too Faced palettes. So let's look at some of the traditional chocolate bar palettes, and then we'll work our way into some of their newer offerings. All right, we have the original chocolate bar palette and the semi-sweet chocolate bar palette. I was very late to the game on these. They had been out on the market, both of them, for quite a while. I just never jumped on the bandwagon when they first came out. I'm not entirely sure why. Then I spent a lot of time debating which one that I would want. I ended up getting the chocolate bar palette first, and then kind of feeling like that was a better choice for me. And then ultimately I've come to realize that I think I prefer the semi-sweet chocolate palette. So let me kind of do some swatches. I'm going to talk you through both palettes and kind of talk you through why I think I prefer the semi-sweet. So one thing I have to say about both palettes is there are 3 dud shades in both palettes. So there's some beautiful shades and then there's some dud shades. But in this palette, I think it's fairly neutral. You've got a tiny bit of warmth coming here from Salted Caramel, but in general, this is a very neutral palette, not warm or cool. I do love Marzipan and Champagne Truffle. Those are beautiful all over lid shades when you just want a little bit of brightness to your lid. I really do like Semi-Sweet and Milk Chocolate. Those are very neutral. This is a pretty gold. It's not my favorite gold out there. It's a little darker and dirtier. Like I said, Salted Caramel is pretty. I will say I think Strawberry Bonbon is a dud shade. It does nothing for me. I also don't care for this purple shade. I found it to be a little crumbly, difficult to work with, and really kind of sheer. And then I really don't care for this Black Forest Truffle. It's one of those shades that's matte with a ton of gold glitter in it, and I just never find that those shades do much for my lids. So those 3 shades there are the duds for me. And I would also argue this Cherry Cordial shade, while not bad, is pretty much the same shade as this Black Forest Truffle. It's just this one has a load of glitter in it. I just feel like although these tones are pretty, I end up with the same look pretty much every time I use this palette, so I just don't feel like there's a ton of diversity in it. In contrast, I feel like the Semi-Sweet palette actually goes cool and warm. So I feel like I can kind of make it go neutral, I can make it go much warmer, or I can make it go very cool. So I feel like I can hit a larger spectrum of colors. So if I want to go cooler, I've got these 2 matte shades, Mousse Pudding, and then Rum Raisin, which is beautiful all over lid shade. So there is kind of my cool tone look. If I want to go warm, I've got Peanut Butter, I've got Bonbon, I've got Caramel, and I've got deeper brown shades that I can use to make a warm look. So there is my more warm peachy tones looks. And then I've got some neutral shades here that I think work in either direction. There are 3 dud shades in here. Like I mentioned, this Cocoa Chili shade is another one of those sort of matte shades loaded with a ton of glitter. So it's pretty much the same shade as this Truffled with gold glitter. So to me, this is a completely wasted shade in this palette. This Blueberry Swirl it's crap. I mean, it really is crap. It's almost impossible to build it up even. So total waste of a shade, which sucks because this could have been such a nice pop of color in this palette. And then Pink Sugar is like glitter. It's, oh, I just scraped a ton of it off. Well, it was hard pan and now it's crumbling on me because I scraped it. It's just sheer pink glitter that does absolutely nothing. So, but I will say out of the 2, I prefer the shades in here and I like the diversity that I get in this palette. I do prefer the larger shade that's in the Chocolate Bar palette. I prefer Champagne Truffle to this Butterscotch shade, which is more of a sort of yellowy gold all over lid shade. I much prefer the Champagne Truffle shade. I don't think I want to keep both of these. So I think I'm going to pass on my Chocolate Bar palette and I'm going to keep just the semi-sweet one. Chocolate Bonbons came out 3rd, and I have to be honest, of the 3, this might be my favorite. It probably is. I really enjoy this palette. So I like these very cool tone looks over here. I like that you've got more neutral shades over here. So whereas I think the semi-sweet is sort of cool slash warm leaning, this one is cool slash neutral. So this is satisfying my need for some of the neutrals that were in the original Chocolate Bar palette. I think that the formula on these is beautiful. I really enjoy the mattes, I enjoy the shimmers, and there's not really a ton of dud shades in here. This Earl Grey sort of deep teal shade is really, really pretty. I love Bordeaux and Mocha. These are stunning, sort of got a little bit of warmth to them, but more in that berry family. So, oh, and then Cafe au Lait is a beautiful silver with a fine micro shimmer in it. So more of a taupe than a silver, I would say. Oh, and then this Salty Sheet, what is that? Satin Sheets is an absolutely beautiful highlight shade. Great for inner corner, great all over the lid. But the only shade I would say is a smidge of a dud is this purple shade, just because it's got a sort of a chunkier shimmer running through it. It is more of a satin with a micro shimmer running through it, so it's doable. It just takes a little bit of blending. A lot of people have felt like these 2 pink shades were totally out of place. I actually really enjoyed both of them as a fun pop of color. So I found ways to work both of these into beautiful looks. So I really enjoy this one. If these colors appeal to you, formula is great in here. This is their most recent offering. This is the Chocolate Gold palette. This one is mostly shimmers. There are 4 mattes that actually make a lot of sense. So you've got a cream, you've got sort of a neutral transition shade, a deepening cocoa shade, and then a matte black in here that actually works really well as a matte black sort of smudgy liner. The star of this show is really, though, these shimmers. This is a different formula that's in the other palettes. It's incredibly foiled on the lid. You've got some really fun pops of color, but you've got really great neutrals. I love these shades. I have gotten so many compliments when I have worn these on my lids, with people wanting to know what the heck is on my lids because they are so pretty and so foiled. You've got a really intense yellow gold. It's probably my least favorite shade in here, so I wish it wasn't the largest, you know, pan of the bigger shades, but you've got a green that's fun. You've got this pink that's a lot of fun. So none of the colors in here are duds, in my opinion. If you've been looking for a metallic palette that has just really foiled, beautiful metallic lid shades, this one is absolutely phenomenal. This is the Stardust palette by Vegas Nay. This was one of the first collab palettes that I ever purchased, and I loved this. When I first got this, I just thought this was so much fun to play with, and it really is. These are great matte shades. You've got 2 other matte shades down here, so you've really got a nice sort of base of mattes in order to play with some of these shimmer shades. The only shade in here I didn't care for was this Jackpot shade, but once again, this was one of those matte browns with gold shimmer in it. I don't like those kinds of shades. Some of these were absolutely beautiful shimmer shades all over the lids. Like, I just had so much fun playing with this palette, especially when I first got it. It was, I don't know, it was just a lot of fun and a lot of really pushed me to make some interesting looks out of this palette. I haven't reached for this in years. I feel like it's time to part ways with it. I think I could get this into hands of a up-and-coming makeup lover who will have fun and kind of have some more interesting shades in their life by having this. So I do think I'm going to pass this one on right now. This is the Too Faced Natural Eyes palette. This is old packaging. They now have new packaging for this. I bought this because I thought this would be a really nice little travel palette with neutrals in it. You've got 4 neutrals here, sort of light to deep, and then you've got some beautiful lid shades. These 2 down here I never got along with. Once again, reoccurring theme, stop putting micro shimmer in matte shadows. I don't understand the point of it. I don't never like those shades in any palette from any brand. The shades are beautiful. I definitely think I've gotten some good use out of this, but to be honest, I never really fell in love with it quite as much as I thought I was going to. So I think I'm gonna pass this on. I think this is a good starting palette for somebody just getting into makeup, and I have a couple of people in my life who are younger who I think would really enjoy this as kind of a learning tool for soft, natural eyeshadow looks. So I'm gonna pass this on. All right, up next are the 2 peachy palettes that are in my collection. I never bought the peach palette in the tin. I never could get past the smell. It just felt very chemically to me. I couldn't get on board with it. These have a very soft peach smell. It's a very different scent. In fact, I think it said it was a peachy fig scent. So this is the Just Peachy Mattes palette, and then this is the White Peach palette. So let's talk about each of these separately. This peach palette I love. This was one of my favorite palettes last year. I feel like if you want to go berry or peach or even warm brown, this is the perfect matte palette for you. I love this. I think the shades blend themselves. They are super creamy. I love the undertones of these shades. I feel like every time I use this palette, I just end up with the most cohesive, I don't know, well thought out look. I don't know how else to describe it. And if you are a warm eyeshadow lover and love mattes, then this is phenomenal. It's got a great mirror in it. Just gorgeous. I have nothing bad to say about this. The White Peach palette has some pros and cons. For me, being fair-skinned, I really like the fact that there's about a lot of light tones in here that kind of give me a very soft, light wash of color across my lid. I would say if you are medium to deep, a lot of these shades aren't going to show up on you very well. So the pros of this palette are definitely some mattes that I think are a lot of fun to play with. I love these sort of cooler tones here. They're really creamy feeling. Same formula, I think, as the peachy mattes, and I loved playing with these sort of cooler toned, murky, plummy, taupey shades here. And then I liked the fact that I had these warmer mattes up here at the top. They were just sort of bright, peachy, summery, fun colors. So I felt like I had 2 very unique color schemes going with the mattes in this palette. The shimmer shades are a little chunky. I feel like all 3 of them in here, really, or these 3 rather, all have a significant amount of glitter, and they all have sort of a chunky texture to them that really does require a glitter glue as a base and to use your finger. However, when you do that, the effect of those 3 shades is absolutely stunning. You have one sort of satin shimmer shade here, which is this gold that is really nice, and it's just a shimmery gold shade. I don't feel like this palette is going to be for everyone. I've gotten some really cool looks with it. It's been a good pairing palette for me. I don't know as if you can get this anymore, but I do know that there is a dupe out on the Shop Hush website for this. I do have that palette, and I have compared them personally, and I feel like the shade quality is definitely there, and the undertones are the same. So I like this, and I'm gonna keep it.